much do you really know about the world that you live in? Have you, me, and everybody been sold a bill of fake goods? A bill of sale that is basically null and void, but we keep believing it, we keep buying into it, and we keep thinking. The powers that be always have our best interest in mind. What if you could control a population, a society, a country, the world, without them even knowing? Having pockets of political figures, government officials, or even a greater organization controlling humanity, making them, marking them, and masking them. Welcome to Hooked.
There are many ways to hook people in. That is, getting them to do what you want them to do. Perhaps one of the most primitive methods of the hook is fear. Make people afraid, and they will comply with you. Of course, money, or should we say the love of money, is the root of all evil. So appeal to one's greed, and they will cooperate. Then there are your emotions, putting them in motion. People will react when they are emotional and feel threatened. And of course, conformity, fitting in with your peers to be just like them. Then there is the social game, just wanting to be one of the group. And of course, there is ignorance, naivety, not knowing or choosing not to know, and of course, the brainwashing, mesmerization of one's mental state.
One of the main tenets of Sun Tzu's Art of War is not just to ride over a country and destroy it and break it down into nothing, but you want to maintain an influence. And because you want to maintain an influence, sometimes you have to just take a little bit more time. You have to be a lot patient. You really have to understand yourself, which is given, but you also have to understand the enemy, quote, quote. More than just understanding the enemy, you have to understand the enemy's motives. Okay, once you understand the enemy's motives, it makes your, shall we say, approach more viable for you, because you're not just looking to overrun. You're looking to bring about a higher consciousness of your needs through the enemy. And once you do that, you got them. I mean, that's pretty much the way that whole thing goes. You don't want to get into a physical or a military conflict unless it's an absolutely last option. You want the so-called enemy or the target to be able to appreciate what you're doing by taking him over. Now, this is brilliance. This is tacticians and strategists really have to understand this particular ability in order to accomplish their goals, of the goals of the leader or the goals of their own society.
We were herded into this concentration camp, which was really a camp of neglect. I mean, they gave nothing. They did nothing. But it wasn't this military kind of control. They controlled in other ways. For example, fear was a constant because there would be lists. And you didn't want to be on one of those lists because the lists were either for slave labor or for the death camps. I mean, everybody knew about the death camps. This was not a secret. And so the main weapon was really fear and starvation. So I was there for 3 years. You know, I saw a lot of things, and people under stress. This is, again, you know, I mean, human nature, there are people who are, the worst comes out in them, and in some not. Some maintain some sort of humanity, but many don't. They become very selfish and very, you know, turning inward. Everybody, it's dog eat dog kind of thing. People knew that people disappeared and didn't come back, right? But of course, that was also a way to keep the local population in fear. Everything kind of is a two-edged razor. It's the direct victims, and you know, primarily Jews were the objective was first to get rid of Jews in all of Europe, but the way in which they dealt with it was also to instill fear in the locals to obey. The fear mongering is right away. The suspicion that you create between people, the demonization of those who don't wear a mask or go out for a swim without a mask. I mean, all kinds of stupid things. Yeah. Because a lot of it was arbitrary. A lot of those things that we were expected to do were arbitrary. It was nonsensical, made no sense, made no medical or health sense. They were conditioning people to obey without question. And that's what any totalitarian regime is after. That's where their power lies.
Are we in the process of history repeating itself? As you know, they say history does repeat itself. Or are we creating a new kind of history, a negative kind of history? You be the judge.
Nobody's really talking about what these, the psychological perspective of these people who are, instilling lockdowns and mask wearing and forced vaccination and all that. Nobody really has been really talking about, the insanity of these people who, are narcissists, who are, like I said, just severely damaged characters, right? The pot stores and liquor stores, were deemed essential services. Insanity breeds more insanity, right? And what's the worst addiction to have? The addiction to power, right? And we're seeing that played out on a 24/7 basis, right? Is these, and let's face it, these people are extremely damaged themselves and have a lot of unresolved issues of their own, where they think that, they can basically take over the world. That to me is insane thinking, right? And they're all addicted to power. And like I said, it's being played out, 24/7.
How much faith do you put in the medical community? Do you believe in medicine? That is, the medicine of today. How forthright have they been with us the last few years?
All of a sudden, there's an outbreak of a disease, and nobody knows what the disease is, but the people in charge are telling you, we now have a major epidemic on our hands, you better wear a mask. And the drug companies, thank goodness that we have them, have created a vaccine that you can take. And if you take this vaccine, you'll be safe. By the way, if you don't take this vaccine, you may be directly responsible for the death of your neighbors, the death of members of your family. The fear becomes that you yourself start becoming guilty of perhaps creating death among your own family and death among your neighbors. That's the fear. And that will give the people who are telling you that it's necessary for you to do this ultimate power over you. And you saw this, what happened with the 2-year pandemic nonsense.
Masks are one of my favorite topics because I think that they are such universal and obvious symbols and surrogate markers of compliance and control, more so than really anything else, because you can't avoid them. They are everywhere. They are not only in hospitals and clinics, but they're on bicycles, they're in automobiles, they're on buses and trains, they're in offices, they're in coffee shops. If you leave your home, you see masks. And even now, 3 years after this panic was started in the spring of 2020, the masks where I live in Los Angeles have not left. In fact, I would say those who were wearing masks are doubling down on them and are not only continuing to wear them, they're wearing them even more than they were before. The reason why the mask is so not just pervasive, but also dangerous, in my view, is that it reminds all of us that we should still be afraid. And fear, in my view, has been the primary fuel for the panic from the very beginning. Obviously, propaganda, misinformation, lying, the disavowal of physicians, cancellation of clinical, knowledgeable people from offering treatment is also important. But I think the fear is really necessary to continue driving the panic. And masks speak fear, not only compliance, but also fear. They say to you, if you're not wearing a mask, why not? And if you forgot to put on your mask, well, here's a reminder. It's on my face, it should be on your face too. I think if we were to get rid of the mask, as I wrote on my Substack last year, ban the mask, I think that would actually remove one of the most potent agitators for the fear. And for that reason, the masks are not going away. They're just staying around, they're lingering in all the urban areas just to keep people afraid.
So about 2 weeks into COVID, I fell into a really deep, dark, ugly depression. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped showering, basically spent, 24 hours a day locked in my room. And I couldn't really pinpoint, um, why I was in this state. Um, and I've spent $1 million on therapy. I've done 10,000 hours of therapy. I've done every therapy known to mankind. And here I was, stuck in this deep, dark place. And, I started having suicidal ideation, and I was just like, what the hell is going on? So I book an appointment with my therapist, obviously online, and, start talking about what's going on. And she's like, so do you realize that you're reliving all of your old abuse stuff? And I said, why is that? Well, think about what's happening. What are they using psychologically, during COVID? Well, they're manipulating, coercion, lying, stealing, cheating. And so, the same tactics that my pedophile abuser used against me is the exact same tactics that the government was using to, gain power and control. And what do pedophiles do? They do that to gain power and control.
I'm no longer a practicing physician at this time because my license has been suspended by the CPSO. It all began in the end of 2020 when I started to notice some major harms in my patients from lockdowns, missed cancer diagnoses, runaway diabetic foot infections, and an epidemic of suicidal children. At that time, we had very little COVID, and the medical associations in Ontario were calling for harsher lockdowns. And I knew I just couldn't live with this. Things weren't lining up. Public health was not advocating for health, but rather only for lockdowns to the detriment of my patients. And so it was that time that I decided to speak out. Shortly after that, the CPSO received 2 complaints from physicians who took offense to my positions on lockdowns and other public health measures, and that began my investigation. So that was the main part of what they came after me for, was freedom of speech issues and offering opinions that were contrary to public health advice. The vaccine rollout came to our community in around March to April of 2021. And I started to see a number of patients with severe adverse events like neurological deficits, vertigo, palpitations, heart conditions, and others. And I followed my legal obligation to report those. And to my surprise, I received a letter from my public health officer saying that all of my adverse events were rejected. And after that, I was surprised. I sent a letter back to him saying, why were these rejected? I don't understand. And he did not respond. So I decided to go public because I was worried that people weren't getting informed consent, that if we're going to have a vaccine safety system, they need to be able to record these to know if there's a spike in these neurological problems. And he actually ended up retaliating and reported me to the College of Physicians, mainly for reporting adverse events.
I'd rather be uncomfortable with the truth than uncomfortable with a lie. I'm not a paid counselor. I'm not an employee. I'm not a volunteer. I'm a citizen. I'm a elected citizen, or a citizen's elect, I should say. And that's different than most counselors across Canada, because they're actually employees in many cases. They get paid a salary and they do this thing every day. But what makes my situation unique is that I don't fall under any workplace occupational health and safety type classifications, because I don't work there. I don't fall under these classifications to be mandated. I have a human rights claim open in regards to my disability. They would not allow me to participate as a counselor in the meetings because I was not fully vaccinated and I couldn't actually do the things that a counselor is supposed to do from their point of view, not being fully vaccinated. So they had decided that they would not consider me as having a reason to not attend. So they blocked me out. Coincidentally, they had been doing online broadcasts with the previous council during COVID when there was lockdown. So there was a affinity to go online and do this similar thing. I've been harassed. I've had bullets through my windows. I've been had a apology by the town online to the public and posted on Facebook telling me how bad of a person I was. I've had a protest outside my house with my children watching the protest going on, put off by 2 counselors.
Is the urban environment that was under the gun here in the United States for pushing the campaign. The push in the urban market in the US paid off far, far more than any push out in a rural area where people are just simply not going to respond to it because they don't need the government and they believe in themselves and they're not interested in giving up their independence in exchange for safety. But in an urban center, my goodness, with all the riots that preceded this, people were scared. They were reasonably scared. And the government came and said, well, now you have something else to be scared of. You're all going to die of this Chinese virus. But we have the solution. And here's the 10-step process in keeping yourself safe, starting with staying home, getting a check, then wearing a mask, getting a shot, keeping your children at home, taking them out of school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Children were the sacrificial lambs of this panic from the very beginning and really received the brunt of the damage from the lockdowns and closures because they are the most vulnerable. And given that everyone instinctively wants to protect children, by announcing that children were at risk of getting sick and then later transmitting an illness to adults and, God forbid, grandparents, there was a very concerted emotional reaction on the part of real loving parents to keep their children safe, which fell right in line with the sociopaths like the teachers' union presidents, the teachers themselves, the politicians, the media, the corporations, who knew that the children didn't need protecting, but who immediately rushed to the side of the parents and said, you're right, mom and dad, you should be scared. And here's how we're going to save them. We're going to lock them in their homes and force them to wear masks.
And I'd say one of the most concerning things that I've noticed over the past couple of years is the willingness of the general population to just follow orders, whether they make sense or not. It's time that you start asking questions instead of just following the orders that clearly you yourself don't believe in. And a good example of this was in 2021, when the mask mandates were in place. I signed 2 exemption forms for my children to go back to high school. A couple of days later, my son comes home and says, Mom, the principal stopped him in the hallway and said, you need to put a mask on. And he said, well, I'm exempt. And she said, well, you need a doctor's note. And God bless him, he advocated for himself and he said, but doesn't the bylaw say that you can't ask for a note? You know, it's just a perfect example of somebody who's pushing these orders through that really doesn't even believe in them herself. And I just hope that as a society, when we come out of this, and I believe we will come out of this, I just hope as a society we've learned that we need to start asking questions. We don't just simply follow orders that don't make sense to us. We need to ask questions. And in democracy, that is supposed to be encouraged, is asking questions. And the fact that they don't want to debate these things or talk about this is a telltale that there's something seriously wrong in society.
I did give vaccine exemptions to patients who are being coerced or who had conditions that they felt and didn't want to get the vaccine. And so I decided to write them letters basically to support their autonomy in making that medical decision for themselves, according to informed consent, right? That no patient should be forced into getting any kind of medical treatment. It was against the law and against every medical ethic prior to 2020. They restricted my license in September of 2021, where they prohibited me from providing any vaccine exemptions or prescribing treatments for COVID, such as ivermectin or fluvoxamine. And I lost my job as an emergency physician at that time. I did try to start up my own family practice after that, in private practice, but shortly after then, they lobbed on a very onerous monitoring requirements where they required they need to hand over any patient their entire file at any time. And so I went along for a while without having to do that. But when that happened, I decided to go to my patients and like, do you consent to your files being released to the College of Physicians and Surgeons? And most of my patients vehemently said they were not okay with that. So it was at that time I decided to respect my patients' privacy and their Section 8 charter rights to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. And I wrote that letter to this college saying that I'm not willing to hand them over without the consent of my patients. And it was at that time that they suspended my license entirely.
All the people who are unfortunately complying with these rules when they're presented with evidence to the contrary, they're just blindly following and believing. And that's what we call cults. It seems like the people who are convinced that this is going to end humanity if not everyone is vaccinated are acting cultish. It's all connected to the media. Unfortunately, the media is the one who sends us our daily messages. And since the very early onset of the suspension of our liberties, case counts and deaths were being put on the television every opportunity possible. Every headline, every opening newscast says, these are the amount of cases, these are the amount of deaths. That is how they instilled fear, in my opinion. That's how they instilled fear in the general public. And then with comments that start saying vaccination is the only way out of this, then starts making people believe, okay, that's what the government said, that's what the doctor said. And so now they've already set in stone, okay, I'm getting vaccinated, and anybody who doesn't get vaccinated is preventing us from getting out of this. So they've done a real psychological number from my perspective on people's minds, on their fear, on their willingness to protect loved ones, and on their desire to get out of this pandemic. They've turned people against each other, and that's what's happened.
There is a major crisis in trust in the medical profession at this time. To be honest, I think it's highly warranted that the medical profession has lost that trust. And in order for it to come back, it needs to be earned back. So how is this trust lost? Number one, I have to say, is the loss of very basic medical ethics. That is informed consent. There's two major parts of this. One is the informed part of letting patients know prior to giving or recommending any medical treatment, what are the benefits, what are the possible side effects, the known side effects and possible ones, especially in experimental treatments like these vaccines. There was so much unknown even at the time that it was rolled out, but you need to tell people, we don't know the long-term effects. We don't know these could kill people. And then after you inform the patient, that's not enough on its own. You have to offer them free consent, free from any coercion. And that is where everything got lost. It might not have been the doctor themselves who were coercing the patients, but sometimes it was. Many doctors threatened their patients, if you don't get this vaccine, I'm going to dump you as a doctor. I'm not going to provide medical care to you. That happened a lot. But even if they didn't, medical ethics, and it's written into the regulations here in Ontario, a doctor cannot provide a medical treatment if they believe they're being coerced by a third party. So if your boss or your boyfriend or anybody is trying to get you to get a medical treatment, and we have reason to believe that you're being coerced, It's against medical ethics for me to even give it to you, even if you wanted it, even if you were begging for it. And that, because that's actually medical battery, and you can sue that doctor because you didn't have free consent.
If you think about it logically, the masks should prevent you from needing to get a so-called vaccination because they protect you from getting sick. But of course they don't. And that's what's so, for me, very frustrating and very bewildering about the whole process. And yet it actually makes a lot of sense, because fear, when it's not grounded in reality, is by definition irrational. And so the masks, which are supposed to protect you and protect others, are irrationally based in their recommendations. Therefore, they spread irrational fear, which then leads people to want to go and get an injection. So something that is supposed to protect you from getting sick actually leads you to taking an action that is completely unnecessary, harmful, and doesn't protect you from getting sick by being told that it helps protect you from getting sick. The whole thing is this very bizarre circular argument, but the masks are a wonderful marketing tool for the shots.
Masking continues to be used to control gullible and vulnerable citizens who continue to buy into the lies and fear. It dehumanizes and alienates people, causing division and pitting people against one another through virtue signaling. The healthcare system coerces and extorts the public by demanding they wear a mask in order to receive medical attention. The elderly are particularly vulnerable as they do not have the wherewithal or the strength to oppose this totalitarian regime. Government facilities have security guards manning their doors and bullying visitors into compliance. The government uses masks as a barometer to determine who is following orders. Unfortunately, many citizens are unaware that masks are not legislated. It is not law, as you cannot legislate against a person's right to breathe freely. The Bible says, "For lack of knowledge, my people perish."
Well, here's the greatest tragedy of all, that they closed down all of their churches. They zoomed in Jesus, and as soon as Big Pharma and the global tyrants gave them money, they opened back up their churches, to sell the devil's product. That's what they've done. That's evil. No one should be listening to them. Anyone that's listening to them does not have a good relationship with God.
I raised the point of the dog that didn't bark in a lot of interviews in the very beginning, when people would say to me, "Why are you being so cavalier? People are dying right and left from this virus from China." Immediately I would say, well, they're not. Look at the homeless in Los Angeles. They're living in their own feces and they're completely fine. I mean, they're not fine because they're homeless and they're mentally ill and they're substance abusing and they have all kinds of awful transmitted diseases like hepatitis and HIV. But they're not dying of the Wuhan virus. And whenever I would say something like that, the person speaking to me would simply ignore my answer and then move on to another topic. So I never did receive a coherent answer to that challenge, not once in the past 3 years. And I still bring it up today. And usually if it's a non-professional person that I'm speaking with, just say an associate, a colleague, a parent, they'll say to me, well, you know what, I read in the local paper that this guy did die under the overpass last month and they found his body and they tested it for Wu flu and it was positive. Or I knew my friend's cousin's mother's cousin's son, who is 12 years old. He was in the hospital and he was diagnosed with the Wuhan virus and he died last week. So they'll bring up a sort of anecdotal, unprovable story that has nothing that I can corroborate and then say, therefore you're wrong, because there were a few people that did die of this. But they never respond to the main point, which on a epidemiological level is irrefutable. There were no large swaths of deaths in very big, and that's a big, Amish homeless populations that I know of in the United States from the Wuhan virus, despite the fact that, as far as I know, none of them were following any of these safety protocols.
if you get this vaccine, you will not spread it to others. You will not be hospitalized. You will not die. It's perfectly safe, even though there's documented autopsy confirmed deaths from the vaccine. Doctors stopped telling people the truth. They just started parroting whatever the government told them to say. And the medical professional bodies as well have undermined the trust in physicians as well, because they put the threats out there very publicly. They said, if a doctor tells you anything that against this safe and effective doctrine for the vaccines, or if they criticize lockdowns, or if they question anything about the COVID protocols, they will be sanctioned and they will lose their license. And so the problem with that is, because that threat is out there, how can you trust anything that the doctor says, even if it seems like they're telling the truth? If they tell you anything differently, they're going to lose their license.
Unfortunately, I've been embarrassed, and my name's been dragged through the mud. My community has questions about who I am and what my motives are, and who's right and who's not right, and whether I should be doing this or whether or not I should. We have the self-autonomy to make these choices, and not you, but who are you to ask me, to do this just because you say so? I've got a little spot on the back of my head. I've had it for about 4 years. If you're able to come and help me out with that and tell me why I have the spot in the back of my head, then maybe I'll have a chat with my doctor, and then you and the doctor can talk it out, and they can figure out what's best for my health, and then I'll take your advice. You know what I mean? But up until such point, me and my doctor and my family will make the decisions for me. Thank you.
Somehow the medical profession was so brainwashed by the media and our medical societies to give gene therapy that it was not tested even on the pregnant women, to those pregnant women. It's insane. I think what it shows is how much of a psychological operation this whole COVID pandemic really was. Because what did they do? They locked us down. That's how it started. They locked us down. They isolated people. They made us all miserable. They ruined our society. They took away our vacations. They took away our socialization, and they made everybody so miserable that people were clamoring for the vaccines. Give me the vaccine so that we can get our life back to normal. And that misery that they put into people also manifested as anger, and they pushed it towards anger toward anybody who didn't get vaccine. You're the one who ruined my life. You're the one that's keeping us from going back to normal. It's a subconscious process, but that's a big part of what happened in society. These people that are so angry at the unvaccinated, it's because of that misery that they caused by the vaccine. That was part of the psychological operation, and that included doctors, so that they saw these unvaccinated patients as ruining the health of all the other patients, that they're the ones that are keeping us in this lockdown madness. And so I do believe that's where this anger and coercion from some doctors and healthcare providers came from, that you need to get this vaccine. If not, you're a horrible person who's ruining society. They weren't realizing that this ruining actually came from on high. It came from it was completely unnecessary, not even effective, but it was coming from the government. But they successfully trained everybody to believe it was coming from the unvaccinated. Doctors got paid oodles of money, got bonuses for working in COVID wards. The infectious disease doctors got big media contracts, and all this new power, right? The infectious disease doctors, nobody even knew who they were before 2020. And all of a sudden, if you have an infectious disease specialty, you're all of a sudden on the news every night. Everybody's listening to everything you have to say, and what you say goes. The government follows what you say.
Has some higher power, that is, a cabal of sorts, been able to control the financial institution and the entire money system?
So what happened on August 15th of 1971 is actually a very interesting point. Nixon detached gold from the dollar. So basically he severed the link between the gold and the dollar. And that's really a historic event. And the reason being is because when the dollar is attached to gold, even if it's 10% or whatever fraction it may be, there's still a correlation. So you cannot create it to infinity. This is so important to understand. Once the link was severed between gold and the dollar, it created the ability of the money changers to create money to infinity. And that's why you've noticed the money supply. It took 100 years to make the first $1 trillion. So those who were, awake in the 70s and the 80s or were born, there was no such word as a trillion. And then come into 2020, the stock market crash of March of 2020, they created 7 or 8 trillion over a weekend to push the market back up because of the 38% market crash. And they were able to do that because they can create money, in essence, out of thin air, and they can create it to infinity. And so they're creating this illusion of everything's great, everything's fine, don't worry about it, we got you, but it's all smoke and mirrors and it's an illusion. And so the fiat money system, so the money became fiat when it was no longer attached to gold, and they have now been able to create it to infinity. And because of that, you're seeing everything explode in terms of prices, but it's all the prices of everything right now is fake, just like the money. It's just that people don't realize it, but they soon will.
Why do they keep people in debt? Well, it's actually an easy answer, in my opinion, when you know their motives, right? So when you have the globalists and the government officials, they want to keep people in debt because it keeps them subservient to them. For example, over the last couple of years, what the Federal Reserve has done is they changed the reserve requirement to zero at banks, meaning banks don't have to have any money on hand, which means they're strapped for liquidity. They don't have any capital. So they also did what's called a reverse repo mechanism, where they took $2.5 trillion out of the banking system during COVID. So they took $2.5 trillion out. They put the reserve requirement to zero, right? So now banks don't have enough money to even lend out. Add to that, the FDIC in a video that they were caught on video, they didn't know they were being taped, said, we can't let the public know about this. We can't let the public know about this. And what was it that they couldn't let them know about? That the FDIC is underfunded so bad, they only have 1.388% of all depositors' assets covered. 1.388%. So forget about the $250,000 basically insurance coverage on your checking account. So what does this mean? It means that people who need money are going to have to do an end run around private banking to go to the government for money. See, it keeps them in control. It's like a command and control economy, and it's all about the control of people, and it has nothing to do with financial freedom.
The moment you open up a credit card and you have a debt on a credit card, you are now slave to the system. The moment you have a mortgage, which is by definition a death grip for 30 or 40 years, you are a slave to the system. The moment you have a student loan, and all this money is created out of thin air, you are a debt to their system. On top of that, they also add an interest rate on top of that. So they're creating money out of thin air, stick an interest rate on that, and they're enslaving humanity. Not only have they enslaved humanity, they've literally enslaved the whole globe. So, this fiat money system, this is just not in the US, it's worldwide. So if you own anything or have credit cards anywhere in the world, you're a slave to the system, to their system. So you are a debt slave. And it's no different than it was in the time of Moses and Pharaoh. The only difference was then you actually knew you had chains on. The difference now is you actually think you're free, but if you have a mortgage or a student loan for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you are going to work every single day to pay down that mortgage or that note or that debt. So you've lost your freedom. You don't even realize it.
The government has, I believe, hooked people into addictive spending, and it's by creating a dependency class, right? So if you look back to the Roman Republic, how did the Roman Republic fall? It's because at the time, the Roman Republic, it was massive, right? It was like the America of today, and they fell from within. They fell because the weight of the entitlement system just broke the economy. So when Rome fell, 1/3 of the Roman citizenry was on welfare of some sort, some kind of government handout program. What do we have in America today? Do we have a third? No. If you look at the federal budget, you can go to whitehouse.gov, look at the federal budget, and we are pushing over 90% of all federal tax revenues is going towards entitlements. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And remember, Social Security is not an entitlement. People pay into it hoping to get something out down the road, right? So what they've done is they've got this massive class of people, pretty much all of America, that are spending, and they've done that through cheap rates, cheap credit, free money. Now they're dependent, right? And so when they go to the government and over 90% of all federal tax revenue goes out towards entitlements, there is absolutely no way that actually we can actually run the country on the less than 10% that's left. So we are way worse than the Roman Republic ever was. So here's what comes next is a complete changing of the monetary system of banking as we know it. And that's coming through central bank digital currency, which is a complete loss of freedom. It's a complete loss of privacy with the ability to cut people off from buying or selling, right? So you get them hooked on spending, cut away any kind of private, financing, go directly to the government, where now they have the ability to shut off buying or selling because you are now a digital entity attached to your digital social profile in a new banking system that they've been talking about in 2023 at Davos and everywhere else about central bank digital currency. And this is not just an American thing. This is a global movement with over 90% of the central banks globally moving towards a central bank digital currency.
Fear can be used to bring about any kind of a condition in society you want. Let's take, for example, a potential food shortage. Now, how do you create a potential food shortage? Well, that's easy. Whoever controls the food starts to cut down on the shipments. Now you got the people going after each other to get to the grocery to grab what's on the shelves before it's all gone. Meanwhile, the suppliers of the food have stored tonnage. So there's really no food shortage. A food shortage becomes an implied tactic to base that terror and fear as a platform for you to control them.
But the whole point of the 15-minute city is that the World Economic Forum is essentially a socialist, Marxist cabal, which believes that Marxism is going to work this time. And it's going to work because now they have the technology. So the 15-minute city is an expression of that. And what it is going to do is it's going to control people's movements. People are going to be tracked. They're going to have to pay tolls if they leave their 15-minute zones. But you're going to be timed how long you're gone. They're talking about setting up technology, and this is part of the reason why they want people to have electric vehicles, is that if you go outside of your zone, they'll be able to detect that and actually shut down your car. So these 50-minute cities are nothing more or less than an attempt to control the world population to destroy freedom. And this is something that presently in Canada, governments are saying is a conspiracy theory. What's interesting is that in Alberta, in Canada, Alberta and Saskatchewan are two provinces that are openly resisting many of the federal government's policies, including on energy and things like gun control, and also in terms of a climate tax. What we have in Alberta, for example, is we have liberal woke mayors in both Edmonton and Calgary. In Edmonton, there is a very strong push right now to have Edmonton become one of these 15-minute city experimental projects. More than that, I recently went online and I saw a map showing where places in Canada are being introduced to 15-minute cities and being incentivized by the federal government. I was shocked, somewhat shocked, to see that it was concentrated in Western Canada, especially in Alberta. So the federal government, because they cannot get a foothold politically in Alberta in terms of seats, is they're going to smaller rural communities in Alberta. They're cash strapped because of COVID and all the other disastrous liberal economic policies. And they're offering them money to institute these 15-minute cities. And so the 15-minute city is yet another expression of, and indeed a progression from, the COVID lockdowns. And the best way to imagine it is imagine the COVID lockdowns going on forever. And the reason why they would go on forever is because they're not based upon an intractable virus, but based upon the sun monster. And of course, until the sun goes out, we would be in this prison forever, a prison of our own making, of our own minds. Sadly, there are many people who buy into this fake climate crisis and are actually willing to surrender themselves to the control of government.
When it comes to the human condition, has the spirit of humanity become weakened, or at least tainted and misled?
Some people go to church because they're afraid. It's like a fire insurance, right? If I go to church, then if something happens, I got that paper, right? I got that fire insurance just in case. But also benefits. I want to have God on my side, because if he's on my side, I'm going to be greatly benefiting from that relationship. Well, I think there is a phenomenon going on. People love to lie to themselves. They love to lie to their own conscience. So as long as I'm going to the church, therefore I'm doing a great service to God. For example, Sicilian mafia, Cosa Nostra, as you know, they would go to church every single week. They would be giving a lot of millions of dollars to the churches, and they thought that somehow you can bribe God, that somehow, if you give a lot of things or money, then somehow that justifies you doing evil things to others. And that's the problem with humans. We think that going through the motions and sit, stand, clap, say a few words or sing is going to justify you before the living God. And then instead of being a follower of Christ, you just become a religious individual. In the end of the day, it's going to be a huge surprise for many people when they will realize that Jesus will say, "Get away from me, I never knew you." And you will be placed with other goats that just wanted to do whatever they wanted to do. In the Bible, it's very clear. God's sheep know his voice and they follow him. And in order to follow him, you have to obey. The Bible says that disobedience or rebellion, if you will, is like a spirit of divination. It's like witchcraft. And there's a lot of witchcraft going on in the churches, believe me.
It's proven. Now, these churches do not represent God. They do not represent Christ. They do not represent people. They don't represent their communities. I think the church is void of a spiritual connection. I think the church is a cult. I think the church is a business. I think the church should be closed down and we should be walking away from them, the ones that don't believe in the pillars of Christ.
Organized religion is no different than organized political system. It's all the same, and they're using exactly the same things. Well, if you run an organization, if you run a business, then you're focusing on the wallets, on money. And that's, unfortunately, that's how organized religion operates. They do not give you the whole truth, because if people would hear the whole truth, half of them would leave and they would take their wallet away with them, and ultimately the organization would be hurting. Well, Jesus was completely opposite. It was multitudes that were following him, but he was not a man's pleaser. He was not running for the popularity contest. He was preaching the truth, and at times it says that everyone, all the multitudes, those thousands, tens of thousands of people, would leave him. And that's where that famous statement comes from, when he turns to the apostles and he says, "Are you going to leave me as well?" And Peter stands up and says, "No, you have the words of life." So it doesn't matter what the whole world says, you are to stay with the truth, but truth costs everything. And people just don't want to pay the price, and definitely organized religion doesn't like paying that price.
Woke racism is nothing but maximum sophisticated confusion. And it has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with even class at this point. It's about power and control and money. You know, it's really interesting. If you go and you talk to Black Americans around the world, or I mean, around in America, they don't trust this government whatsoever because they've seen the damage. But then you have Black people that look like us, not the barbarians outside of the gate, but the barbarians inside of the gate, that's pushing these policies on their own people. So I dare say they're anti-Black. I dare say they're anti-human. I dare say they're anti-children and anti-community, because to suggest that I have to show you a slave passport to go to the grocery shopping and do travel, or I have to mask my kids to engage in a narrative of deceit and deception, I call them the mask of shame. I said right then and there, those Black people need to pay a price, because those are the same Black people that will go out in public square and talk about Martin Luther King. They'll go out and talk about Malcolm X. They'll go out and talk about Harriet Tubman. They'll go out and cry about racism every day, when in fact they're engaged in the worst kind of racism.
When you think you have everything your heart desires, then you become God in your own mind. Therefore, you don't need God. I think that's the problem in human nature around the world, not just North America. When we become comfortable, we forget about the living God. In the Bible, it says, when you possess the promised land, when you take the houses you did not build and the vineyards you have not planted, just do not forget about me. I believe that the Western civilization has forgotten about God.
I'm often asked why the 15 to 20% of the population that seems to have this immunologic protection against propaganda has that protection. What is it that differentiates them from other people? Why is it that the rest of the population doesn't get sick, so to speak, from or infected from hearing all of these lies? And I do believe it's a kind of immune response. There seems to be some innate or inherent protection that these people possess against propaganda. And I haven't defined the specific quality, but I see some characteristics that are common among all those people. And one of those qualities is that they live and work and speak and interact in the real world. And what I mean by that is that they tend not to spend most of their time on social media or in front of computers or in, say, an academic environment, an intellectualized institution. They tend to live in places that are more rural. they tend to work in fields that involve cutting wood or laying bricks, working with their hands. They are involved in the cause and effect of the world, of the planet. And therefore, by being in that cause and effect all the time, they cannot accept a belief system or a propagandized mechanism that doesn't conform with actual reality. So they are beholden to truth. They are beholden to reality in an almost unconscious way. And they also tend to be, in addition to that, very self-aware and very much in containment and in control of their own emotional responses. So the opposite of that is really where you see people who are getting the most sick. They are urban and they are emotionally uncontained, and they do not live in cause and effect, truth and reality. Those are the characteristics that I see that cut across all ages, races, political spectrum, etc., that separate out those who are predisposed to buying the lie versus those who are protected from it.
So we're hearing more and more about the concepts of fake news, lamestream media news, and of course it's called legacy news. That news that goes all the way back to when our parents first turned on a TV set or turned on a radio, perhaps a transistor radio, and caught the news. How accurate really has the news been? And is it really being truthful with us today?
There's never been real journalism in this country, and the thing that destroyed it and put the nail in the coffin is simply this. The worst president in American history, that's Bill Clinton. He signed NAFTA, which sent all the jobs overseas. He repealed Glass-Steagall, put into effect during the Depression by Franklin Roosevelt to prevent Wall Street from gambling. And his repealing it led to the 2008 recession that cost me $1 million home and cost millions their homes. And then the worst thing he did, he signed the Communications Act in the mid-60s that put all the media, 98% of it, into the hands of 6 monopoly corporations. When Kennedy was alive, there were 1,500 different owners of the media. Now it's 6 monopoly corporations. They should be taken to court and disbanded as monopolies, as they did to AT&T back in the 1950s and 1960s.
You know, I started in the broadcasting business as a journalist, as a news person, and it was a whole different world back then. And before my time as a journalist, the likes of Walter Cronkite, which I still believe in those days, there was propaganda and they were pushing agendas, but nowhere near what you see now. I think it was a job of us in the media to basically be barometers, to put checks and balances in places for politicians and things that were going on in our cultures. I think now with the media, we used to do news at 8 o'clock, 11 o'clock, noon, 5 o'clock, and 11 o'clock. Those are the prime times of the big newscasts, and we present the facts. Nowadays, you've got news 24/7, and it's not journalism anymore. And it always comes off, and it's propaganda. And it pushes a narrative. You never see both sides of the story. And never as a journalist were we ever, back when I was in news, allowed to sit and make one decision from one side. We always had to pull our information from both sides, stick it down the middle, and let people decide for themselves what the facts were, what the truths were, and make them think. That's been totally lost now, because media nowadays, they think for you. You sit back and relax, let it get pushed into your head. And there's never a question. And that's a scary place to be in media.
Your ideology is false to the enemy. He's going to try to figure out a way to get around it or to ignore it or to deal with it. The reality of this comes down to, yeah, it may be your false reality, but it's our real reality. And just to make a difference, there's a difference between a true reality and a real reality. A true reality is an intellectually discussed process. A real reality is the actuality of having it done physically to the people.
How has the mainstream gotten away with all that they're doing? That's a really good question. I'm still blown away that so many people are believing. Funny thing is, though, I think most people don't actually believe. I mean, you ask anyone, you tell them the news is lying, and they'll acknowledge. They go, yeah, I know. But they still listen and they still believe. And it's astounding to me. How they got away with it, I think, is just repetition. First of all, fear, because when people are scared, they're more susceptible to listening to voices of authority. So that's one big ingredient, is all the fear they planted in people. So they look for a voice of authority they can trust, feel they can trust, and just blindly listen to it, which is crazy because most people I talk to know the news isn't truthful, but yet so many still believe. Exactly how is a very good question. I don't know. I'm astounded that so many still believe the news, mainstream news, that is.
Well, I think it starts by understanding who owns the media. And so, particularly here, I mean, I would imagine that our media in America, we know that's kind of the thing that pushes out across the world. But there are 6 main conglomerates. That's it. 6 large companies that own everything. And so when you break down those 6 main people, they own not only the regular television stations, but they own the news, they own the weather channels, they own history. 6 companies. So you figure one main person at each of those companies. So 6 people are in charge of the entire narrative. Regardless of how they think or what narrative they want to push, it's very easy for governments to come in and grab those 6 individuals or main companies and to then say, this is the narrative you're going to push.
We hated the fake news. And Biden is worse because he is well aware of the fact that he could sign an executive order reversing the Communications Act, putting the media back into our hands. And it's not there. Thomas Jefferson and John Kennedy said more important than any president in this country is the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights giving us free speech. Because of free speech, if we do not have it, we will not be informed about the men and the women who are running for the highest office in the land. These are exact quotes. America does not have it, and I'm telling you, it will not have it.
There's a lot of people out there, thousands, and I don't even have a guess. It's a lot of experts in their field saying this is wrong. But yet the majority of people don't hear about this because mainstream media doesn't bring attention to them. That's where I'm really happy and honored to have these brothers being able to do that. We're almost, as of this month, we're at almost 7 million newspapers that we printed and distributed all over the country. And we constantly have like doctors on here. This couple months ago, this one written by Dr. Mark Prosy. But there's a lot of people out there. We just need people to dig in more and not just blindly believe what they're told on the television.
I think why the media really started to attack me was because I had never spoken out about anything as an athlete. And all of a sudden, I'm going against the narrative. I'm connecting with another patriot warrior, Theo Fleury, who already has been seen to the public and the media as controversial at times, exposing pedophilia and speaking out against mental illness. And they didn't like that. And so it was unusual for them to see me speak out. And I became a huge target.
Since birth, pretty much. I mean, we've been not being told truths for a long time. It's been getting worse and worse as far as the lack of truth through media and a lot of the mainstream outlets. The amount of truth coming from them has been less and less. And then come 2020, it's like they flipped the switch and it's 100% propaganda now. But I feel we've been groomed in many ways. The education system is a big part of it. The education system doesn't teach us to think for ourselves. They teach us what to think and how to regurgitate. And that's not really helpful. It's helpful to the agenda because later people hear and repeat, like we see a lot of right now. When we get hate mail, it's pretty wild. They all, not all of them, but a lot of them, the majority, say the same thing, and it's what's fed to them off the television. There's no thought behind it. You can see they're just repeating what they're hearing on the television.
As an athlete, we would do interviews and we would go back and watch them, or we would read the next day in the paper. and we would see something not completely different always, but a little construed, a little twisted, not exactly what we had said. And so we started to figure out that the media has, ulterior motives. They have an agenda, maybe even. And then through my awakening, I was seeing it every single day, watching the fear porn that was being put on our televisions. And it didn't surprise me. But what did surprise me was all of us athletes who weren't seeing that. They started to think, well, what else are we supposed to believe? And I'm like, well, when we were athletes, you knew the media said different things than what we had said sometimes. So it was really confusing to me how people bought into it.
I've always loved I've always loved psychology. I consider myself an amateur psychologist. It's fascinating to me. And I've really noticed patterns. And it's almost like when you look at the different issues of the day, whether it's present or the past of the United States, whether it is what's going on overseas, whether it be Ukraine, Russia, COVID, vaccination versus non-vaccination, it seems that there is a common thread through both sides, so to speak, because there is a clear division. I mean, I think everybody knows that, goes without saying. There's a clear division of sides. And the powers that be, they're no dummies, right? Divide and conquer. You separate the people and get them fighting amongst themselves, then you can implement things on the wayside that people aren't even noticing because they're fighting amongst each other.
I don't know what the social media sites themselves intended to do. I mean, we can guess from their censorship and stuff, but it's really us that unified and divided, and it's really a matter of perspective. Like most people, I started out with, your 100 people, connections from various forms of life when this all started. And I thought to myself, I bet there's more people like me that are thinking like this, but I don't see them in my daily life when I go to the grocery store or something. So just to kind of prove something to myself, I built up a community of people that share, certain commonalities. So for me, it was a uniting experience. Some of those original 100 people came in to try to divide that, but as the momentum grew, the voices I was hearing were becoming more unified. Now that we're several years into this, it's kind of fracturing out again because we're not facing sort of the same imminent threats, and it's becoming more of a existential, philosophical kind of question of where are we heading, and I'm seeing some more division happening again.
Misinformation and disinformation are rampant terms on social media. I believe there is simply information. Your mind and critical thinking capacity are your built-in mechanisms and filters to process that information. Do not let social media censorship dictate what you read or devalue your own ability to think, rationalize, and discern.
Even people that are like-minded about some of the issues around big pharma and censorship and stuff, they are attacking me the more I say certain Christian things. But then it's also drawing other people of faith more towards me.
So has the entertainment industry been, let's say, manipulated? Are we really seeing what we're supposed to be seeing, that is, the real intended message that entertains us?
Well, I believe we've been programmed for a very long time by the television with programming. And I think that what's happened and what we're seeing through this whole especially the last 3 years, is that everybody's dependent on what the news is telling them. And it's the truth. And I think that that has been done very cleverly over the last decade or even 2 decades. It's a slow process to brainwash, if you will, program us, MK Ultra. There's lots of different programming going on. And it's really difficult to get people to not follow what they're saying or to deprogram them into what the real truth is.
Where you've got 50 different newscasters and they're all repeating the exact same thing. There's no change. There's no variation. It's always the exact same thing. So it's very easy to then look at like the MK Ultra and the brainwashing, the CIA programs of the 60s, where they were testing, how can we brainwash a society? How can we get them? And they did tests on humans. They would bring them into the movies and they would show them things and they would figure out, okay, here's what works and here's what doesn't. So long before this time in history, the CIA, these 3-letter agencies that are all corrupt, they are not official federal agencies. They're all private entities, private corporations, but they all know how this works. So then when you tie that with the entertainment and Hollywood and print and TV and music, even the music industry, they're all tied together. And so it becomes very easy to push one narrative to get the minds changed. When you think of the word television, it's tell a vision. So they're going to tell a vision. They're going to have you tune in. It's all sorcery. We're going to tune you in and we're going to get you to go to the channel. We're going to channel you. When you start thinking about the words and the languages that they use, your eyes start to open. And so I believe that they've just been using that for decades to brainwash. Really, what I like to say is they've learned how to subvert the culture to the narrative that they want.
Music industry, I mean, you remember in the 70s, music was kind of like anything went. I mean, it didn't really have to be a good-looking person. You could dress how you want. It was very, you could put a country song and a heavy metal song on the same album. It didn't matter. Music was music, right? And then it started to change by the 80s. Well, actually by the late 70s with the disco coming in, everything started to segregate, right? So you started having marketing ploys. Well, people that like country hate rock. People that like rock hate country. They pin them against each other, right? And it was a marketing ploy, and you could see it. And then as things, grew, as video killed the radio star, that was a prophetic song, right? As it did, you started to see the image started taking over of the musicians, and then what was happening was that there was this pull. So you'd have again, a certain type of music here, a certain type of music here. They never crossed. And you'd get actually people angry with the other side, So it was a segregation of music, which I could never understand, because early 70s, 60s, everything was boom, thrown into one, it was all good.
I can't say that I'm specifically aware of politicians directly impacting sports, but if you look at my actual scandal in 2002, there was a whole trade going on, and I don't know how deep the onion layers are there of what political parties were involved, but we've known as athletes that judge sports, there's politics in everything. It's hard to get by, and you get told as a kid that it's normal and do your job, just focus on your job and not to focus on the political side of figure skating. It's always been there.
I mean, I only noticed it really when I saw this whole thing with the vaccine, like the whole music business, like unifying and coming together on supporting this vaccine. And I mean, the one thing that the music business is, I'm not sure if they've ever been able to do this or this was just a ploy, is that, what your parents are into, they don't like that the kids are into it too. They can sell more albums if the kids think they're being more rebellious to the parents, you know what I mean? They can sell more albums that way because it's like, wow, this is our music and that's your music, and, but I couldn't believe the vaccine thing. They made it cool for everybody, you know, and I've never seen marketing like that in my entire life. I've never seen that, you know, where the young people and the old people are coming together on something that was honestly just a brilliant marketing scheme.
I think it's immoral what's going on with the sexualization of children. It's criminal to take young children who we know their minds are wide open subconsciously from the time they're 0 to 7 and maybe a few years past that. Instead of being children that get to play and learn together as we did when we were younger, they're being forced narratives. And a lot of it is sexualized. 10 and 11-year-old girls who were in tight spandex doing provocative moves, and that was okay. You've got TV shows and movies now where you have actors who are in their 20s playing kids who are supposed to be 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. So you're getting a whole different view of what the maturity of somebody would be at that age. And I think we're in a dangerous place now, taking children, sexualizing them. They don't get a chance to expand at a younger age like they normally would. And you're being forced into something that I think is dangerous for society, especially dangerous for kids, because what you're going to get is you're going to get children who feel they don't fit in. They don't look like those people. They're not as sexual as they are. And again, bullying starts, and then we have a problem with our children, which is so sad and so scary nowadays.
I remember reading an article, and I can't remember when, so I'm going to paraphrase it, but it was a long time ago where it was either in the 40s, 50s, maybe even earlier, where Hollywood and other media companies, Hollywood was selected to lead the world in morality and fashion. Okay, and I thought, wow, that's kind of crazy, right? And then when you break down the word Hollywood, you realize that the word Hollywood is wood from a holly tree is a magic wand, and it's there to transform you into what they want. Now, you start adding some of the conspiracy. I don't even think it's conspiracy. You start adding the government agendas today. You start adding the agendas of the globalists. I mean, look at how Hollywood has supported the vaccine. Look at how Hollywood has supported everything that they want to promote. And not only that, they're against Christianity, aren't they? I mean, anybody does a Jesus movie or anything like that, they're blacklisted.
I think the sexualization of children has always been a part of the media. You go back into the 50s and probably before, but a lot of cartoons had explicit sexual things going on there that you never really paid attention to. Yet now, when you see it in slow motion, you understand what was going on. There's all kinds of phallic symbols that have been put in big movies, big cartoons. And it's been a slow process, but now it's becoming something that's right in your face, and you can see it. And the unfortunate part is people aren't standing up against it.
Oh, it's time to go get your vaccine. I mean, they were using that to promote that. I've never seen that. I've never seen kids programming encouraging that. Usually that's left up to the families. It goes even deeper. I mean, right now, particularly, and I think this is probably everywhere, but particularly here, we've got drag queen story hours. We've got that in our national education programs here in the States. And so they're coming at these kids from every angle. And I think that the detriment was, and when you really look back, you think of the families of the 70s. I mean, I was born in the late 70s. You think of the 70s, and all of a sudden moms had to go back to work because families couldn't live. So now mom can't be at home all the time. Once the 80s got here, moms had to go back to work. And some of that was by choice. Some of it was not by choice. But now you've got kids stuck at home, and they had TVs because all of a sudden TVs and entertainment was getting bigger. Buying a TV was cheaper. Every family had multiple TVs in their house by the 80s, And so now you've got these kids at home, multiple TVs, multiple shows. You didn't just have the 11 channels or 12, 32, however many channels were originally. You've got cable. Cable now comes in. Then you've got HBO and MTV and all these alternate channels that are coming into the home, and parents have been removed from the home because they have to work in order to provide for their kids. So now you've got kids being raised on these shows. And I don't think parents had, I don't want to put blame necessarily on parents, because a lot of them didn't know. They didn't know what was coming. They just thought this was entertainment. It was this new era of entertainment. But when you look now, what has happened with those generations, we have lost millions of people simply because of what entertainment has brainwashed them to believe.
Pedophilia is something that we're all becoming very aware of. It's involved with a lot of aspects of our lives in advertising and in media, day-to-day stuff that's going on in schools. And I believe in a lot of cases it could be motivated in the media from people who are possibly pedophiles. And I also think in doing that, you are stimulating people who are pedophiles who would stay more or less in hiding, where it's becoming more open now. I think it becomes more aggressive and more comfortable for them. And I think for the most part, a lot of people are being desensitized by what they see on television and in movies, and everything is okay. And I really shouldn't say anything because I'm going to ruffle the feathers of somebody, when in fact we should be standing up. And we should be standing up now, because we're at that turning point now where we're not going to be able to turn these pages back.
When we were touring, it was more like, you know, people talk about the Illuminati, right? And it was, the Illuminati, you know, we'd always laugh, you know, we thought it was a bunch of garbage, right? We didn't believe it. But, you know, for some reason, you'd always have some people get the breaks, some people not, you know. We used to think, well, maybe it's the people with more money, right? I mean, I remember one time we had a phone call saying another man's gun was getting play in where was that now? Kentucky or something like that. No, Kansas. And they said, do you want a hit? Do you want a top 40 hit? We should, yeah, sure. So they said, okay, $800 a station. And when we worked it out, it was like, you know, over $1 million. And well, we can't afford that. They says, okay, that's fine, just checking. And you know, like, if we'd have had the money, we'd have had a top 40 hit. We didn't have the money. I've got a friend in the States who's an up-and-coming country artist. She's a songwriter. She's doing quite well. And she just got a call from someone asking her if she wanted to join the Illuminati. They said, we can make you, like, we can make every one of your dreams come true. We're asking if you want to join. And she turned them down. She said, no, I want nothing to do with this. But it was like, I've never heard of that before.
You know, the propaganda, the brainwashing through media, especially through education, it's all in that direction. And that's been for at least, especially increased within this century, especially, where that's all you have. The students are indoctrinated now. They aren't educated. And this has especially become to the point now where you have, you know, constant teachers actually advocating for, you know, little kids, you know, thinking they want to change their gender when, you know, they might not even understand that. So it's become lots of, there's an agenda there. And you have people that are entering the schools at elementary school level, and then certainly at the college level. If you talk to any college professors, I mean, that's just standard there. And we see the censorship all over campuses where they don't even let, and I'm talking about conservative speakers who are, you know, nothing radical at all, but they won't even they don't want students to have any kind of different perspectives on any of these subjects. They want it all to be one direction.
You know, the underbelly of all of this COVID craziness is pedophilia. You know, it's not hard to figure out. It's not hard to see it. You know, if you do your research, it's all there in plain sight. Last time I checked, grooming was against the law. You can be charged for grooming, and yeah, it's sick, it's twisted, and you know, how ironic is it that the government is actually pushing this? What does that say about, you know, the people who are in government, right? Makes you wonder and you know, want to ask that question. You know, why are you so obsessed with, you know, with pedophilia?
Canadian government is facilitating the sexualization of children through a multi-pronged approach. They began with amendments to the Human Rights Code, both provincially and federally, to include gender identity and gender expression as a protected class. Then they implemented a radical sex education learning resource called SOGI 123, Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, also known as CSE, Comprehensive Sexuality Education, which was mandated by the UN for all member nations to comply with. This resource is designed to sexualize children at the earliest age possible and to confuse them about their God-given sex at birth. The resource is strategically intertwined into all sections of the curriculum so that parents cannot pull their children out. Children are being indoctrinated and led to believe they are the opposite sex. Children en masse are saying they are no longer their birth sex and identify as the opposite sex.
And again, I think it's through propaganda, it's conditioning, it's popular and what celebrities are saying. And virtually all the celebrities have been pushing this. And once they see a few celebrities have gone and become transgender or whatever, I think that, like for instance, in my, not far from me, Montgomery County, Maryland, I read recently, I was shocked that it was something like, I forget what the figure was before, but it was transgender students were almost non-existent, 20 years ago. And within the last 5 years, I think it had increased, hundreds of percent or something like that. So you're going to, unfortunately, because children they're the most susceptible to propaganda. And if it becomes the point, I wrote my book, Bullyocracy, that's kind of flipped upside down. I'm not sure who the popular kids are in school anymore. It may be the people that are coming out and becoming transgender. So I think there's going to be a lot of peer pressure as more and more kids want to do this. Their friends are doing it. They're going to pressure their parents. Just like, if you're a parent, you experienced how, I want an iPod. I want, whatever's the newest thing. When their friends are getting it, they're going to pressure their parents to do it. And this is going to be a pretty sick extension of that. You see things like mothers taking their 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds to drag strip bars. I don't know what to say. I don't know that I can talk to people like that, because that's a level of conditioning that previously unheard of. But I think it was a long time in the making. But once it becomes popular and mainstream, and it has become mainstream, and the people that are still consuming that popular culture, they're going to go with this because they're going along with everything the popular culture is promoting.
And this whole woke thing, now all of a sudden, okay, where it's becoming an accepted practice for drag queens to perform in front of children in schools. What's this about? Equity? What are you trying to do? You want to destroy the intellectual process of the children? You want to destroy their sense of morality that you are born with, by the way, and reinforced by different devices such as religions, things like that. But you're taking away their ability to make a conscious choice for something, and therefore anything becomes permissible.
Wokeism is working to destroy parental rights and societal norms. Children are being targeted not only in the classroom, but in public spaces. Sex activists are rife throughout the education system, and they are using their position to hypersexualize our children to make them an easy target. Drag queens are men with adult sexual proclivities who are being given access to our children at an alarming rate in taxpayer-funded public libraries and at special family-friendly events endorsed by your local mayor and city or town council. Any man dressing as a woman and going out of their way to read to children and sexually perform for them is a predator. Plain and simple. Our children are being preyed upon, all in the name of diversity and inclusion. Pedophilia is the name of the game, and it is a global epidemic.
This is what's the scariest thing about this. This has all been institutionalized. This is every government agency and every corporation, corporate America. If you run afoul of it, if somebody complains, well, you didn't recognize my pronouns. And again, people that are relatively sane, like what we like to think ourselves as being relatively sane, this is something it's like we're enabling, insanity when you do that. What do you mean you're changing your pronouns? What are you're they and them or it, or I don't even understand what it means. Again, but this is all part of the entire thing to say language is fluid, just like gender is, and the language is racist or whatever. I mean, you can't You can't have a civilization like that when people are not on the same page in terms of basic communication. And ironically, in recent years, you've actually seen the left try to ban people they don't agree with politically from restaurants. I said, if you don't see the irony in that, the entire civil rights was built on that. So but I don't think they believe in civil rights at this point. It's maddening, and it makes people sound. It makes me sound like a white nationalist, which I'm not. I'm a classic liberal.
In December 2021, the Canadian government passed Bill C4, an act to amend the criminal code against so-called conversion therapy. Conversion therapy had not existed in Canada for decades because it involved inhumane treatment that included castration and administration of harmful drugs to individuals who were struggling with homosexual feelings. The government resurrected this term to manipulate people into believing there was an injustice in order to advance their radical 2S LGBTQ agenda. What people do not realize is that the very thing the government said they were against, they are now inflicting on our children. They are now castrating children, mutilating their bodies, and administering harmful drugs, all under the facade of diversity and inclusion.
Abnormal in behavior. Yes, abnormal in behavior. Once you do that, and they start letting all of this occur, it becomes the norm. And you heard the expression, this is the new norm. Sorry, it's a disgusting attack on our children.
Those of us who've had the experience, we know what grooming looks like, right? And obviously, pedophilia is probably one of the biggest epidemics on the planet. And it's silent and it's hidden because they know. Look at me. I held on to my secret for 27 years before I told it. And I would say in most cases, that's what people do is they suppress the memories, suppress the emotions, which then leads them into the mental health and addiction space. And but eventually, you get to that ultimate choice and that ultimate decision, right? Am I going to die or am I going to live? And when people choose to live, they go on this incredible journey of healing. And then once you're on that journey of healing, you totally know and see, what's going on. And it's very easy to see in plain sight, that they're trying to make pedophilia normal. They want to normalize it. And everything that they're doing is leading us down that path and down that road.
The drug problem is based on, for example, Sun Tzu's attitude on the nature of attacks. Nature of attacks has to be complete and total, but you just can't come in and overwhelm. You have to do it in a subtle manner. And how do you do this? You start attacking the youth. What's happening here, by destroying the youth, everybody's a target. And once that happens, they will turn on each other.
So I think the ignoring of the fentanyl crisis in the US, yes, it's a domestic problem, but I think it's just one more example of the ignoring across all of the Western world, especially the Anglophone countries like Canada, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, of the needs and interests of their own people. Basically, letting their people die, sacrificing them on the altar of joining an international cabal that really doesn't care about the well-being of its people. It only cares about the well-being of the elite at the very top of the food chain.
I think it's terrible, the drug problem we have in Canada. First off, with legalizing marijuana, now you have a province legalizing fentanyl, heroin, places giving safe and free injection sites, encouraging people to use drugs. A lot of the sex workers, they just work for crack or coke. They go out, they do their tricks, and they'll go change it with their drug dealers. Government's basically getting rid of most of the sex trade crimes. They're lowering the ages of consent. They're lowering a lot of the penalties for the sex crimes. Kids get involved in it, adults. You have break-ins going on in the houses, people to make money for these drugs. It affects every aspect of the country and every age of the country.
You know, the money, the drugs. Well, when I was in that line of work as a doorman, a bouncer, all the girls got in there with it was mostly organized crime. The biker clubs, most of the girls were their girlfriends or the young girls that they brought in, the young girls, and then the whole French table dancing thing came, and you had an influx of all these even younger girls coming from Quebec and other provinces. They were underage, but you don't question that because it's just I was there to do my job, and that's about it.
Strip clubs, where they're supposed to be regulated, drugs are sold in there. Like that's one of the main places where you would go buy some cocaine or some crack. People on the street, there's people underage, children, hooking for their drugs and for their habit. And there's adults using these children for sex acts. By taking away the teeth that the police can use on these sex crimes, there's not much the police can do anymore. They've taken it out of their hands, a lot of the workings that the police could do.
Manipulation of circumstance means that whatever is happening that you have got to change for your own benefit is put into action. Well, how do you do this? You start working with the hierarchy. All right. Once you're part of the hierarchy, you can pretty much get away with whatever you got to get away with. Human trafficking is a terrible thing. Obviously, I'm not going to go into the morality of this issue. It should be pretty obvious. But they do the same thing. Hey, listen, you're going to work for us because if you don't, we're going to whack your whole family. Oh my God, I got 12 sisters and brothers and 19 aunts and uncles. So out of terror and fear. See, the whole thing with taking over anything is based on the propagation of fear.
Human trafficking is happening everywhere. It's a $150 billion business, the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the entire world. As far as travel and tourism, there are destinations that people travel to participate in exploiting and trafficking, whether it's children or individuals. And some of those places are in vulnerable populations where there's been disaster or poverty. You see a lot of that in also places like the borders. What's happened at our borders being opened in the United States, and primarily children coming through without a family member, somebody with them. And these individuals are literally by the droves getting lost into this country. And it's known that there is trafficking happening there and exploitation. However, we're not hearing about it, and we need to be. Different parts of Southeast Asia where there are night markets where people from all different countries, but even Western countries like the US and Canada, Australia, Europe, and they come there to participate in completely evil and exploitive things with children, with minors, with women and men against their will. People being trafficked at major sporting events, when there's a big draw into a certain city, and whenever there is vulnerability. And what did we see with this last 2 years? There's also a specific attack on children and young people with social media. And we see these social media companies that have done nothing to stop human trafficking being facilitated through those avenues. And that's definitely one place with technology that children especially, but all people are really vulnerable. And we need to be aware of it. And it does need to be we need to call out these companies and leaders.
It's always about fear and greed. If you look back over the last couple of decades, you can see how people have been kind of hooked in through social media, through communications. Everybody wants to be connected. Is there some great cabal at work controlling the masses? Well, we've seen COVID-19, the pathogen, attack humans. We've heard rumors of war, and now we see Russia and the Ukraine. Where do we go from here? What is the next monster to frighten us? Is it global warming? Will the sun finally burn out, or will it incinerate, implode, or will we get struck by a comet that will lead to massive world blackouts? We've had civil unrest. Will there be even more civil unrest to ignite more violence? Inquiring minds really do want to know. Then, of course, there's the continual threat. We are not alone. The aliens are coming. Perhaps it might be a really good thing. They may see how crazy it is here and just leave, or some of us may be very fortunate to hitch a ride and go to a better place.
There you have it, folks. Hooked. The experts have spoken. Of course, it's up to you to believe what you want to believe and make your ultimate decisions. But hey, it is pretty interesting that possibly there is definitely more than has met the eye going forward.